Slavery, a thing of the past. We abolished slavery over 150 years ago. But did slavery actually come to an end? Or did it just evolve? But did slavery actually come to an end? Or did it just evolve? Have you heard of historian Arturo Schomburg? While women who have been central in the fight of our liberation are erased or overlooked. From merengue to rock and roll, your favorite musical genres are rooted in blackness. But black liberation isn't about some of us, it's about all of us. You can't tell nothing about us without us. So, did we actually abolish slavery, or has it morphed so much throughout time that we just don't recognize it? Kinda like 50 Cent when he lost all that weight for that movie no one watched. Curtis, is that you? First, let's start with the US. If you open up a textbook, hopefully you'll read that on December 18th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation abolished slavery. Word conveniently didn't make it to Texas until 2 whole years later. When it comes to the abolition of enslaved Africans in the US, let's not give Abraham all the credit. No one gave the enslaved Africans in the US freedom. They fought for it. Like the Stono Rebellion in 1739 that took place in the British colony of South Carolina Low Country. This was the largest slave insurrection in US history. As the story goes, on September 9th, 1739, enslaved Africans joined together to march down a road while carrying banners that declared liberty. It started with about 20 people, but it is said that by the end of the night, they had recruited at least 100 people. But unfortunately, the South Carolina militia intercepted and defeated them. Those that survived the rebellion were executed or sold to markets in the West Indies. But there's no doubt that they put up a good fight. This brings me to overseas. Because here's the thing, enslaved Africans weren't only trafficked over to North America. The transatlantic slave trade actually brought a majority of enslaved Africans to Latin America and the Caribbean. Meaning, the US wasn't the only nation to have a slave rebellion, and we weren't the first either. That honor goes to Haiti. See, before gaining their independence, Haiti was the French colony known as Saint-Domingue. And during the late 18th century, the enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue started a 13-year war for their freedom, known as the Haitian Revolution. And on January 1st, 1804, Haitian General Jean-Jacques Dessalines declared Haiti's independence from France. And the first thing on the agenda, you guessed it, banning slavery. And the second thing on their agenda, abolishing slave trade. The actions of Haiti set an example globally that it was possible to emancipate yourselves. It inspired others to fight their own liberation. Hashtag Age of Revolution. With slavery being canceled left and right, this left a lot of wealthy slave owners out of money. And it's not just slave owners whose pockets were hurting, but the entire infrastructure of nations depended on the free labor of enslaved Africans. Just look at the US economy alone. According to historian James McPherson, in 1860, enslaved Africans were the largest financial asset in the United States, valued at approximately $3.5 billion. It's estimated that between 1801 and 1862, cotton production in the US South increased over 400%. The production of cotton is what positioned the US to have one of the leading economies in the world at that time. From the advancement of Wall Street to the building of railroads, slavery is tied to the financial and industrial development of the US. And it's really no different when you look at other nations that decided to import Africans as a source of free labor. Saint-Domingue's economy relied heavily on slave labor. Before the Haitian Revolution, Saint-Domingue had been producing 60% of the world's coffee and was Europe's largest sugar importer. So how did nations make their money back if their main source of income was gone? This brings us to today's main question. Did slavery actually come to an end? Or did it just evolve? Transatlantic slave trade may not be fully intact anymore, but human trafficking, low-wage industries, and the prison industrial complex are up and running. It's estimated that nearly 25 million people worldwide are trafficked. Human trafficking earns global profits roughly $150 billion a year for traffickers. People are trafficked for numerous reasons, like cheap labor and free labor. Trafficking people internationally for free labor. Sounds familiar. Let's take a look at Brazil for a second. During the Atlantic slave trade, Brazil imported the most enslaved Africans than any other nation. By the 1830s, coffee was Brazil's largest export. So what happened to Brazil's title of #1 exporter of coffee once they abolished slavery in 1888? I guess not much, because today Brazil is the world's largest coffee producer. The coffee industry is one of the largest markets where people are human trafficked. In 2019, the coffee industry in Brazil profited 18 billion reals in revenue. And a 6-month investigation uncovered extensive slave labor running Brazil's billion-dollar coffee industry. The investigation uncovered children, undocumented workers, and underpaid workers. Speaking of little pay, low-wage industries is another way slavery has morphed throughout the years. A lot of this is fueled by what is known as racial capitalism. Basically, it's not any old capitalism, but it's capitalism rooted in racism where Black people and other people of color are seen as a vehicle to continue profiting off of. Let's flash back to pre-abolition days in the US. Enslaved Black people, they weren't just working the land, they were also a major force within the hospitality and service industry. They were housekeepers, caretakers, food service workers, and the list goes on. Years after slavery was abolished, the hospitality sector didn't want to pay freed Black people. So sure, they were hired, but received virtually no wages and relied on the tips they got for a living. That model still lives today. Those who work in the restaurant industry, dry cleaning workers, fast food workers, housekeepers, childcare workers, and personal care aides are often getting paid low wages. And the truth of the matter is, Black people make up almost 2/5 of low-wage earners compared to 1/4 of white people. And sure, in 2019, Congress introduced the Raise the Wage Act to bring the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but Black and Latina workers are also more likely to experience wage theft, where even though they should be paid $15 an hour, due to ineffective enforcement, employers get away with paying them lower wages. Black Americans don't only over-index when it comes to low wages. Black Americans are overrepresented when it comes to the prison population, the prison industrial complex. Basically, putting people behind bars is profitable. And guess who's leading the race when it comes to that lovely business model? The US of A. We beat out China and Russia for #1. Yep, we're #1 in the highest incarceration rate in the world. Not something to brag about. Even though the US accounts for 5% of the global population, we're responsible for 25% of the world's prison population. We're talking about 2.2 million prisoners in the US justice system. And of course, even though Black and Latina Americans represent about 1/3 of the US population, we're 56% of the US prison population. And I should note, Black women are in prison twice as much as white women. From setting bail bonds to charging for phone calls, or even the insanely low paid labor from inmates, this is a business model that the US is financially thriving from. But who's making money off of this system? Well, let's talk about companies like Geo, CoreCivic, and Unicor that make over $5 billion in revenue, mostly from contracting prison labor to various companies and corporations. Companies are building wealth off of the astronomically low to free labor from inmates. We're not talking about paying inmates for working in the kitchen like Orange is the New Black. I'm talking about them being behind making some of the products you and I use and buy. For example, in the Unicor work program, inmates produce clothes and furniture but are paid anywhere between 23 cents to $1.15 an hour. Oh, and did I forget to mention that many inmates also work as firefighters while getting paid almost nada, like in Arizona, where professional firefighters are paid $22 an hour, but inmates only make $1.50. Aside from the labor sourced from prisoners for both private and public prisons, the criminal justice system is the largest employment sector in the country. We're talking about prisons employing a whole lot of people, from probation officers to police officers to wardens of prisons. If prisons didn't exist, a lot of people would be out of a job. But wait, This business model our government has of making money off of incarcerating people, mainly Black people, doesn't just stop there. Meet the Prison Industrial Complex Part 2, ICE and detention centers. See, police are to prisons as ICE is to detention centers. Remember Core Civic, the company profiting off of prisons? Well, guess what? They're not only leading the company for private prisons, they're also leading when it comes to for-profit detention centers. And a majority of undocumented immigrants, approximately 70%, are held in private for-profit detention centers. How much money are we talking about here? Core Civic reported $1.83 billion in revenue, and 27% of that comes from their contracts from ICE. Anyone else feeling a sense of looming dread? Know that those who benefit from these systems of oppression are hoping for exactly that. They're hoping you feel powerless. While we didn't construct these institutions and the real responsibility lies on those who actually profit off of them, those people and these institutions do thrive off of our ignorance. Our biggest weapon is knowledge. So take these breadcrumbs of information and keep searching for more. Share the knowledge with others so we can raise our collective consciousness and financially support companies and organizations that are fighting against systems of modern-day slavery and oppression. If you're committed to the liberation of Black people, then the fight to end slavery in the US and globally is not over. It's gonna take the collective resistance and resilience of all of us. But luckily, we have the example of our ancestors and of Black people around the globe to follow. We can honor their lives by following in their footsteps of unification and solidarity.